Let's get to our guest. As we mentioned, two members of the investment banking and corporate banking teams at Wells Fargo, Jon Weiss, CEO, and Danielle Squires, once again, head of diverse segments for the group. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us here. As I said to you as you were sitting down, I feel like we've had some very meaningful conversations, and it's not just conversations, it's about metrics already being laid down and actions. Jon, come on in on this collaboration, this event, this inaugural event, and what it means to Wells Fargo.
Sure. Well, Carol, thank you, and Tim, thank you for being here. This is an important conference for Wells. I think it's an important conference for the folks that are here. We've gathered 150 plus very senior executives from the Black community, and it's a networking opportunity. It's also an opportunity to learn from some of the success that some of these executives have experienced, what drives them, what challenges have they had, what has motivated them. And we're still, in the early hours of it, but it's been very impactful.
Jon, take us behind the scenes here and sort of the generation of this event. What were the conversations that were happening over the last few years where the executive team said, okay, this is something we got to do?
Yeah. Well, it started actually, and we were talking about it a little bit earlier, it started in a conversation that I was fortunate to be part of, and a couple of colleagues, African-American colleagues, at an event that was celebrating the success of some of our own people. And the topic came up, why don't we do something like this on an external basis? And of course, we'll pass the baton in a minute to Danielle, but Danielle leads this diverse segments effort for us, which is a really important effort. And the question came up, why don't we host something like a Black Business Leaders Conference? Mm-hmm. And it seemed like a great idea. That was about 18 months ago. It takes a little time to organize these things and slot things in.
Because there's nothing going on in the world.
Because there's nothing going on in the world. And,
everybody's free this week.
But and we chose New Orleans because it's obviously a place with a tremendous amount of history to the African American community and culture. It grew from there, and it seems like the beginning of hopefully many more.
Danielle, come on in on the conversation and tell us about some of the conversations that were going on and what you guys wanted to create. So it wasn't just another conversation that 2 years from now, 5 years, we're like, oh, that was good conversations, but what did we do? We didn't do much. You want to show that there's actionable results.
Absolutely. And I think the first thing we think about is we have to have a strong connection first before we can lead to action. And so this is a conference where we aim to connect folks together. Folks who might not have been in a room together before, folks who may have been in a room together 20 years ago but need to be in a room together today. And really, the first step is to talk about it. The second step is to really do something about it. The other thing I'd say, too, is from our perspective, our whole mandate is to grow and maximize positive outcomes for our diverse clients and communities. And there's no better way to do it than how can we grant greater access to the capital markets? How can we create these connections and form lasting partnerships that take it beyond this? And so we've had great conversations. And as Jon said, we're in the early innings. We do this for another day tomorrow. But what we've already found is that there are more opportunities than anybody thought going in. And unlike Vegas, right? This is not what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in New Orleans has to leave New Orleans and spread out, and that's our goal.
I feel like there's so many things I want to follow up on, but relationship. I feel like the investment banking world is so much about relationships. And I remember talking to an individual, big M&A individual, and he said, I look to put people together that like each other, get along, because that's going to be a good deal. But let's build on that. That's this idea of relationships, because I think within the financial community, whether it's the underbanked, unbanked, there's a lot of relationships that just they don't exist.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you focused on that, because a lot of people look at banking and think of it as a transaction. Mm-hmm. And really, it isn't a transaction. It is about people. It's about the relationship. And ultimately, it's about the trust that you establish with another party. And hopefully, we're helping to build some of that trust here, not only between Wells Fargo and some of those parties, but among themselves. And I think it's absolutely critical. And to M&A, if you really want to get to the heart of it.
It was Jimmy Lee at Morgan Stanley.
JP Morgan.
No, JP Morgan, rather. Forgive me, JP Morgan.
But, Jimmy would have said it. the reality is you have to have a culture and a common vision for M&A to work. And whether any of that is spurred at this conference, we'll see. But the relationships absolutely will develop into future business opportunities for people.
So Danielle, how are you thinking about success here and how you make sure that what happens here leaves New Orleans? I mean, what are the benchmarks that you're using internally and externally for our investor audience?
Yeah, I think for some of us, we're really looking on following up from here to talk about sort of what are the collaborations and the meetings that happen, what are the new joint ventures that form, what are the building opportunities, the financing opportunities. And so because we have folks from every industry group you can think of, right? We have financial institutions, industrials, consumer and retail, across the gamut. We have business leaders and nonprofits.
Are these people from everywhere in the country?
Everywhere in the country, right? We brought a really intentional group together to say, hey, we're in this together, and how do we leave this together? And so following up on that with the ideas that come out of it, we have a whole group that's really just focused on when we leave, follow up on every single individual.
What I do find interesting is that some of the folks who are here could be ostensibly viewed as competitors to Wells Fargo. How are you thinking about that?
You know what, in the grand scheme of life, there's no competitors to the mission of creating greater and positive impact for our diverse and underserved communities. And quite frankly, we're all in this together. And we will do a lot. But it's going to take more than one bank, more than one institution. And I think we all need to rally around that. We all need to push each other forward. I also like to say, look, at the end of the day, it's also not a zero-sum game. We can all win, and we can all win together. And I think that's really what we're focusing on. So yes, there might be a technical competitor or two, but when we walk in that room, we're all collaborative partners. And when we leave the room, we all have projects to work on together.
Well, are you guys already thinking about how you leverage this model above and beyond?
Oh, absolutely. Well, we're leveraging it, as Danielle said, across our consumer business, across our wealth business, and our commercial business, banking business, and our corporate banking business. These, like any relationship, things do take time to develop, but we're seeing a lot of momentum coming out of it, and some business that we no doubt would not have contracted has already come. So, yeah, I see a lot of opportunity coming.
Like in the last 24 hours?
No. Like I said, some things take a little more time.
We're talking relationships here.
Yeah,
so.
no. You're developing these relationships, but you're also starting to, get inside people's minds as to what their strategies are and what they want to achieve with their companies. And those may be conversations that we would not have had access to were it not for this diverse segments effort. So,
how do you guys think about the diversity internally at Wells Fargo so that you make sure as you're trying to broaden the impact on the community at large to be more inclusive, that to make sure that you've got the right parties and a diverse group of parties internally to help facilitate all of this?
Oh, it's symbiotic, isn't it? So, I mean, we're trying to make sure that our client base reflects the opportunity in America and gives access to that broader client base. We're also making sure that we look increasingly like the rest of America, and it's that interaction and diversity of thought and diversity of interaction that's going to lead that sparks business.
Is that pipeline to the C-suite getting more diverse?
I'd say yes, but it's a and I don't mean to say anybody should be patient about this. I think we should all be very impatient about it. But you're hiring the best talent, and you want to make sure that you're reaching the broadest possible talent community as you do that hiring. And hopefully, if you do that well, and if you develop well from within, you're improving your representation across the board.
I want to ask both of you how the conversation has evolved. And we talked a lot during the pandemic, certainly coming off of the pandemic and the inequities that were revealed, George Floyd. We had some really smart conversations, and I feel like some very deep. And I feel like with colleagues, too, where all of a sudden we started to look at the world in a different way. How has the conversation evolved that got you guys to this point here, whether it was looking internally at what your own firm was doing? How is it? And I think about who's listening right now or watching right now, what what they need to be asking themselves. Danielle, if you want to start.
So, Carol, I love what you said, and the operative word here is conversation. What we'd found for a long time is we weren't actually having conversations, and so with the
I found that from our colleagues who said we just didn't talk.
No, and we almost sat blissfully in not talking, almost unaware of the fact that we weren't talking. Some of it wasn't malicious, but it was just sort of we went on about our everyday lives and made assumptions of maybe ourselves and each other. And I think what we've been fortunate to do at Wells Fargo, and I'm sure across many other industries and spaces, is continue that conversation and continue the dialogue and say the hard things and sit with uncomfortable spots. And I think because out of that grows opportunity, out of that grows honesty. And a lot of what we've done, and we've done over the last couple of years, and we continue to do, and it's really what the genesis of this is today, is create the moments of opportunity, right? Spark can't happen unless you put two things together to create that flint, right? Create that moment. And so that's what we continue to do, is to just dialogue and have conference and talk through the hard things. For us, that's what's moved us forward.
The only thing I would add is I think you have to be deliberate. You have to be deliberate in how you develop people. You have to be deliberate in the client base that you're chasing.
Can't just be accidental.
Accidents, don't lead to strategies.
Is that what's different, John? I feel like that there is a lot more things that are deliberate. I like that choice of words.
I think that's, in everything we do, we need to be deliberate, right? So why would we assume that developing talent is any different? In fact, it's got to be at the core of it all.
We'd be remiss if we didn't ask about business within your segments. So, John, I want to start with you and just thinking about corporate and investment banking, the environment right now. How would you describe the environment right now?
It feels like it's recovering a little bit. It's been a couple of relatively tough years for the M&A business and some of the capital market businesses as well. We're actually having a pretty good year within Wells, at least through 9/30. I don't want to forecast anything. Part of that is some secular growth that we feel like we're experiencing. We've been hiring some additional talent. I feel like the engines are starting to fire a little bit as a result of sort of renewed calling that came after COVID. COVID was a very disruptive period in business generally. Mm-hmm. And if you're the challenger, which in many cases Wells is in the corporate investment bank, it's important to be out in front of clients in person. It's really hard to win business away from someone over Zoom. So our team's been out trying to generate business, and I think we've started to see some signs of success.
Danielle, your thoughts?
So I would add to that. So being a part of the corporate and investment bank, everything that John says also applies to us. And we consider ourselves almost like a mini investment bank within the corporate bank, focused on diverse clients and communities. And I would say the key word is our intentionality has seen that business grow. And the ability to cover clients, not just for what they do, but positively for who they are, has allowed us to have those greater inroads and work for our clients in different ways than before, and it's been fantastic.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. Thank you both, and thank you for including us here in these conversations.